welcome back. It's Christine again with the Artist Pod, and today we're going to be talking about how to draw a jackal. As always, I'm using a Wacom Intuos Pro tablet, and I'm drawing straight into Photoshop. So, let's get arting. Alright, so here is the jackal. Jackals are a couple different colors. They have kind of this brownish reddish color and some white. And a lot of on their forehead and up in here, the brown and the white kind of mixed together. We're going to start with the red by the nose. As we build up fur, as always, right, I do one stroke, another stroke, and then one in between, matching the length of the fur itself. That'll help build up the texture. And then following the contour, right, as we come over, making sure that's coming over, because as it comes off the nose this way, it's going to be at that angle, whereas, up the middle, that hair is going to be coming straight up. So this is another sketching step, but this step is designed to sort out that direction so that when I get to shadows and highlights, I won't have to worry about sorting out what direction the fur is already going, because I've already done it in this step. So, just building that up, start twisting it over as it comes over to the side of his face. They have kind of these narrow faces. And then, there's sections that are solidly white and sections that are a mix of the two, so we'll probably pull the brown into everything except what's pure white. Right, so come to the side, start looping that over. You can see my stroke itself is kind of looping a bit. Coming up, looping that over, bringing these up, and then making sure that's remaining consistent. That's what's going to indicate to me the shape of the nose. Right, so it's important in this step that I get this sorted and avoid line conflicts. It can be unfortunately easy sometimes to have line conflicts, and that's times when, I have hair going this way and then you have hair coming this way, and there's a problem because now you have to reconcile that. So that would be like a line conflict. It can happen around things like the eyes and other locations. Now there are black around the eyes, but being mindful of that. Now as you're building it up and you get towards the eyes, typically the way the hair is going at this point is going to be this way, and then it's looping down right on this side. That's often how you build fur up around the eyes, because it sort of runs into it. If it came all the way to the edge of the eye, this hair would be running into it, and then the hair above would be going and sort of swooping up, and the hair below would be turning down. So just an easy way to sort of build that up or understand where that fur change typically happens. Can be different depending on the animal, but 9 times out of 10, that's what's going to happen. You get kind of used to certain things are always true, or almost always true. And while it's good to always observe and ensure that what you're doing is right, now with jackals, I didn't double check, but it's likely true, since they are in that kind of wolf family, much like coyotes. There's nothing from my research that indicated that was different. Right, just bringing that hair up. They're short-haired, so I'm keeping my strokes a little shorter, but I don't have to keep them too short. Say we could extend them just a bit. It'll make that a bit quicker as we bring the hair up. Right, same thing over here. Build that hair right here, runs right into it, underneath it's looping down. So if you need to reverse the direction you're drawing, like I did with both the eyes, you can do that. I didn't really need to do that, but I thought it was important to demonstrate. And I will sometimes, if I'm uncertain on how something will be running together, I will reverse where I'm working so that I can make sure that it's going to make sense, because that's going to be important. Now, some of this is running into areas that are both the brown and the white, So white underneath here, brown and white on the cheeks, brown and white, more white here, and then brown and white on the head, on the forehead. All right, so I'm going to pull it up into here. So as we're coming up over an eye, typically it's a bulge, right? Our eyes are a circular bulge in our head that sit in a recess. And so therefore, you know, as you bring it up, you loop it over the eye. You have this little section that kind of loops like that. Normally I'd say be careful around the eye, but he's got black around the eye, so we're not going to come right up to it. Right, and then, you know, as it comes up the forehead, it's kind of angling off. So you have the middle coming up, the sides kind of going off to the sides. And this is a section that has a little bit more white in it, but it is a blend of both. So we'll put the white in here when we sketch that too. Same thing on this side, right? Bringing that up, looping this up and over. And that's white over the eyes here. All right, now I'm going to come underneath. Again, this is another section that has white, but it's mixed in. All the way up to this down here. So this does transition into white. Bringing that down. Right under the eye, it's going to come down like this. Now as we come to an edge, right, we're coming to this kind of edge here. I am going to loop this down. You can see I'm sort of looping my strokes down. And then when I come back out of it, I'm actually going to loop it up. That'll indicate a bump to us visually. Right, if I take that off, you can kind of see there's that little bit of a bump. We'll see it more once I build it up a little bit more. And then as it's coming on that back side of the eye, changing direction, you know, as we loop up, because that fur is going to be coming up. So having it loop down here, changing that direction here, loop down, and then sort of continuing that on, and we can loop it down again when we come to the edge, or not. We can have it come straight off. Doesn't really matter at that point. Right, so now if I take it off, you can see there's what looks like a loop here, or like a dip in his face. So just changing your line direction like that can do a lot to make sure that you're capturing that. Now over the eyes, right, there's that bulge, so as it comes down this way, we have this back side of the bulge, so being mindful of that before it kind of straightens out. Still has that bulge happening on the side of his face, right, so I'm still looping those strokes. And then it kind of straightens out as it comes up and off. Now there would be no dip, but until then, there certainly is. And we can pull it. And then pulling this up. Right, we still have this bend happening because his head's going in that direction. We need to make sure that none of these lines conflict, even the lines we haven't drawn yet, right? Even this white is going to need to blend in with the strokes we're making now, so it all has to make sense together. Just build it up. And because it's fur, you don't have to be careful at the edge. I can pull it right off the edge. And it's a subtle transition, right? It's straight up that middle, right? So straight up the middle here. But as we come to one side or the other, it's going to be kind of a slight angle. It slowly builds itself up. Otherwise, it'll look out of place, right? So all of these lines coming off at this slight angle, and then you work up that angle. So there's a little bit of pre-planning there, and that you need to know where you're twisting it. Because if you're just coming straight up, like we talked about before, right? Like if I'm going to have some line conflicts, I might do this and then this. Well, that's going to be conflicting. So I need to make sure it's a more gentle transition than that. Which is easy enough to do. You just sort of, you have that middle line coming straight up, and then, you know, from there you have these angles coming off of it. Especially because you're always aiming in between a different stroke, right? So if you want to make sure that makes sense and it's coming straight off of that, it kind of helps you make sure you're sort of lined up and making the lines make sense. And then as we pull this back down, right, coming back through here, that hair that's coming straight down, or coming down off of the eye, I guess it's more at an angle and not straight down. Depends on the contour of the face. So if their faces were a bit flatter, you know, I might change how that contour is coming down. Because this is all indicating to me the humps and bumps of an animal, so that when I add shadows and highlights, I can kind of see where transition from shadow to highlight needs to be. Right, just following this around. Once again, as we come to that edge, looping that down. Right, coming to that edge, looping it down. And then underneath it, looping it up. Right, and we can really see that on this side that we've built in. It'll be easier to see once we build the whole thing in. I often will take the sketch layer off because I want to see exactly how something's looking. The sketch layer on will interfere with that, so you'll see me often pop that off. Just like with this one though, right, we have this bulge in the eye, so you have the hair coming down as you have hair coming up, and then it'll meet kind of in that middle. So being mindful of that, because this will need to make sense with all of that. Still looping that down, and then back up. And then either, again, you can come straight off, or you can loop it back down. And it's coming straight off because that bulge is no longer there. Forehead, relatively easy. Not a whole lot of twists or turns you need to do, you just follow those lines out. When you get by the eye, there's that humping that we've talked about, right? Like, so some of that will come into play, but otherwise forehead, you just come straight to the edge. Now there's some brown on the ears. The hair on the ears, especially on the outside of the ears, is often, again, shorter, even on a short-haired animal. Shortest spot is typically by the nose, so basically down in here. The whole nose going into the face is typically the shortest hair on an animal, but the shortest by the nose. And then the ears, you have short hair typically there as well, until you get the longer fluffy bits. But the hair on the back of the ear, which is looped around, and therefore we can kind of see it, is typically a little shorter, even on a long-haired animal. So if their hair is longer, typically this is shorter. I will say I've seen cases where that is not true, and cases, rarer cases, where the hair on the face is long as well. But usually even on long-haired animals, the hair on the face is shorter. The rule isn't as consistent with the ears, but it's enough that it happens pretty consistently. Something like a panda, think some monkeys, some other animals, their hair will have long tufts. Kind of changes the game a little bit. Right as I bring the hair up on the ear and get to the tip, I kind of change that angle. I'm looping that up. And then down this side, having that angle come down. Yeah. Now to add in the white. So then we're going to start down here by the nose. Not a lot of space on his little cheeks down here. We're going to start over here. Looping it in, right? So I'm still putting one white stroke in between the red as we loop this down. So that rule still kind of applies even though I've changed that color. Otherwise it'll look out of place. It won't look like it's a continuation of the same thing. And then the hair along the nose comes straight off of it. So I'm not going to loop it down unless I get to the edge and decide I want to, but I'm not going to loop it off of the nose. Down here I can. And I will because of this, right? Like some of his mouth comes over and then you have, I guess, some of his chin. Right, so just looping that down just like before, where we had that edge here, looping it down, and then we have an edge. So I'm looping this down before it comes back up, assuming it has enough room to. And then it just comes straight down. Same thing here, there's another edge here. Looping that down when I get to that edge. It's a way you can do wrinkles as well. And then looping it up as it comes off. Right, so if we take that off, we can see that clear line down the side of his face. Changing that angle as we bring this over. Often when you get to the inside here, it is sort of angling in towards the opposite side just that little bit. So same thing is true on this side. And likewise on this side with that hump, right? Bringing it to that edge and looping it down. Looping this up. Now his chin, line straight down, and then lines kind of off to the side, and straight down. So it kind of bulges, right? Not a lot of space to work with the chin here. And then up in here. Eyes, right. Needed to make sure that it balances what we've already done. Just running right in. Having this loop down. And this up on this side. Starting to look a little Jackal-like. And then they have some white up in here. Nice and easy. It just runs right into the ear. Before I add in the white to everything else, I just realized that I didn't bring over the brown here. I'm going to do that real fast. Alright, and now we'll get back to the white. So we have all that white sort of mixed in. Gonna still build it the same way though. So just sort of putting that right on top of the brown, following the same angle. In some ways it's easier because I've already sorted it out with the brown. Alright, and same here, but I'm going to be a little bit more sporadic. Because it's not, the red is much more prominent through here than the white. So the white is a little bit more concentrated under the eye, just like it kind of is in this section. So I put those strokes closer together. So when I say I'm being more sporadic, I'm spreading them out, right? Like as I do this, I'm leaving a lot of distance in between the strokes. That's how I'm going to lessen how much white is in here. But down in here, much like up in here, putting them much closer together. All right, get like this nice blended effect. Now this is going to change a bit once we add shadows and highlights. So we're going to do that with the brown first. Going to have the light source coming from above and to the right. As always, that means it's coming from above and in front of, not behind or next to. And on the side of the light source, it's full pin pressure. So all this would be in highlight. So this is just full pin pressure. Following the lines we've already put down because we've already sorted out the direction of the hair. So we don't have to worry about that. And just building it up. Still a short stroke because his fur is still short on his nose. Now, you'll notice I tend to layer it more on this side first because at some point over here there's going to be a transition to shadow. And I would have to sort that out. For now, everything I'm doing would definitively be highlight. It's on the side of the light source. So I'll often start with this just because it's a little easier. Following those lines, which makes it easier because right now I don't have to think about it. Right now all I have to do is follow what I've already done. To put some thought once I get to spots that will have some shadow in them, but for right now, not as much. That highlight's definitively going to be at least this far. It'll shift and change once his nose rounds away. But it won't have done that yet. Doing good so far. So there often is highlight all the way to the edge of the eye over here because you have that bulge coming down. So that's a good line to understand that there'll be highlight all the way over to that. You're trying to sort out how to turn, where to turn shadow and highlight, exactly where they blend together. The highlight will always come over to that eye. Well, usually it'll come over to that eye because of that bulge in our heads. And then some of it's going to determine where I've flipped them. Because this is indicating to me this is still on top, and then it rotates down. You don't want a highlight and shadow change to happen in a color change. So this is a little bit of a color change, so I don't want it to happen there. So there's probably a little bit of highlight all the way over. But see it transition at some point through here, because I'm inclined to say this would be shadow. When I do shadow, it's just light pin pressure. Not putting a lot of pin pressure. This is shadowed area. But some of this is highlight. I'm giving myself some flexibility to pull that over. Some of this is also highlight. So Let's pull that all the way up for now. And then obviously this is back into highlight, right? We've inched our way back over, fill in this gap before we work on that side. So this is still highlight right on that edge, because that, you know, if the nose is humping up and over, then it's probably just starting to transition down right through here. So that highlight would come all the way to that edge. I am going to go ahead and do the rest of this side in shadow. The reason for that is you don't want the transition from shadow to highlight to be jarring, so this gives me flexibility to be able to sort of feather it in. Basically, I'm giving myself enough room to work by making all this shadow instead at the moment. Again, just light pen pressure. Still doing what we were doing before, filling it all the way in, just with light pen pressure. You can see that difference. Now, normally I'd wait to fill the rest of this in, but I am going to go ahead and fill some of this in. So some of this is definitely still in highlight. See, all this is definitively still highlight. And all I'm doing now that I'm drawing into a section where I've added a ton of lines is I'm adding more lines. I'm not really putting full pen pressure because I don't need to. More lines will also brighten it up. And then we'll taper that off as we bring it down. That's probably still highlight though. So the only place we're really having shadow is down into here. Add more lines and brighten some of this up. I don't think we're in shadow yet at this point. Or even at the edge of this. Now the rest of this is all blended. So I'm going to do light pen pressure through here. Because once we do the same with the white, it's really probably going to brighten it up a lot. Maybe moderate pen pressure. So a little heavier than just what I do for shadows, but not as heavy as if we were doing a full highlight. Alright, so now what I'm going to do, instead of going ahead and finishing out the brown, I'm going to see how this looks with the white on it. Right, if we do the same thing with the white, should brighten it up. And then, you know, mix it in. May have to brighten up the brown underneath, which is what I'm not sure about. We'll see. I don't think it looks bad. Gives it that nice, you know, you get the impression that it's a mix of colors, which is good. I keep starting new layers because I don't want to, I'm experimenting a little bit here and I don't want to mess it up. So I am going to put full pen pressure though here, because this can add in some white on top, but this is mostly brown. Now as we bring this up, you know, there's a point at which this is the back edge of the ear, right? So as we start bringing it back behind the ear, we're going to need to pull that into shadow because that's on that back side. So the highlights in front of the ear would be blocking Now, of course, you know, the top of the head would be in shadow anyway, but we have to pull it down a little sooner. Once we sort of round that corner, right? So we have, let's say, the back of the ears hitting right through here. We need to start transitioning that in, right? So as I do that, that's light pin pressure all the way up to the top of the head. I'm actually going to extend this up a little bit. There we go. Now, to figure out exactly how deep that shadow should be or how much of an extreme angle to consider our light source. So again, that's just something that we have to sort of sort out because it'll change depending on where your light source is, above to the right. So I had my angle coming down in here. So as it's hitting in the front, it's hitting on this angle over here, which would cast the shadow probably up into here, and then we have the top of the head kicking in. That would be in shadow anyway, coming straight across at this point. So it's not much of a shadow, but we would still see it. Bring this over, getting that light pin pressure. Back of the ear on this side, a little different because that angle's different. The ear on the left side isn't really blocking the light source. But, you know, of course, still the top of the head's in shadow, so I'm going to go ahead and get that all the way in first. And then kick the rest of this into highlight. The white is coming through just that little bit, which is good. We might not have to add much white on top. I'm also debating, I don't know what would happen if I made this full pin pressure down in here. Yeah, I actually think that blended it better. And then to blend it even more, we can pull the white off a bit, but we'll do that later. Sometimes I forget what I'm doing and I draw on the wrong layer, so I bet, yeah, I did. So I'm just gonna, I know that seems crazy, but I'm gonna take it off. Just in case I decide this is, I need to remove this, I won't remove a chunk of his forehead in the process. I often find that I accidentally draw on the wrong layer. That's one of the reasons I'm so paranoid about checking. Now all edges are in shadow, so I'm actually going to come back down in here and do that real fast. So even though this is on the side of the light source, right, still in shadow because his body is rounding away. It's just that light pin pressure. We'll bring that all the way up. I'm going to do the same actually for this little dip. It'll help make it stand out. And if, you know, in the end we don't like it, we can always put full pin pressure and get rid of that. Not on this edge, but maybe on this one, although I think it'll work. But just like we did on the top of the head, right, this edge in shadow, and of course the back side on the other side of the face would have a much deeper shadow. Because that is on the full shadowed side. Okay, shouldn't have to be anything much, just right where this would be dipping down would be potentially casting a little bit of a shadow there. And it's easy enough to see because we've already changed the direction of the of our brush, right? Like we shifted that direction, so it's easy enough for us to see exactly that edge. and then back into full pin pressure. I'm backing it off a little bit. Now up there I was doing it shadow out because you don't want a strong line where the shadow and the highlight are. Sometimes I find that easier to then work out from the shadow so that you don't accidentally create a sort of a harsh transition there. But it's just a matter of, as you're bringing it in, just backing off your pin pressure right before the two connect and sort of releasing that out so that it blends nicely together. And if we need to, I can always blend it a little bit more. Now the eye, this side of the eye, and there's some black here, so this probably isn't as dramatic, so I'm not doing it as much. Right, there's that ring of black. How deep is that? That's actually pretty deep, so I'm not going to do it at all on the back side. Usually if the eye, if you're coming right up to the edge of the eye, this side and the top is going to be in shadow. But because we're running into black, I don't actually have to do that. And then under the eye, always in highlight, you're going to have that burst. Because you have, the eye coming right back out from under, it's rounding, up. So that's facing up, whereas this is rounding down on the top. Where it's rounding into the eye, this is rounding up as it's coming out. Now I may timber this out. It might be a little too dark. I'm going to leave that for now. All right. So once we get back into this side now, we've got to start thinking about where the highlight is transitioning to shadow. Forehead often has a lot more highlight. And usually it starts transitioning, so you have a hump here, right, of the eye, where our eye bulges, so that's obviously going up. Usually the forehead still has highlight at this point, so it's a safe bet to have all of this in highlight and extending kind of up this way. So that shadow, it's going to be following the head up in here, but we have some white here that'll be taking some of it. So it's going to go, there's probably a little shadowing here on these tips because that's where the ear starts, but it's going to be highlight all the way almost to the edge. You have the white that would, be over here. So all of this solidly highlight. And still. All right, so we're going to get this in highlight. And then I'm going to back off my pin pressure so that I can sort out exactly where that transition happens. It's going to be happening somewhere over in this vicinity. And it'll just be easier to sort it out if I put everything on this side in shadow first and then work it out from there. Right, so once again, just light pin pressure. Okay, so, right now, that's a pretty harsh transition. So we are just going to feather this in, and I'm not going to be putting full pin pressure, right? Because we've already added in a ton of lines. Although now that I say that, I'm going to bring this back out just a bit. And change my layer. In case I go a little too far, right? But not putting full pin pressure just adding more lines, and the act of adding more lines will add a highlight, and then we can really feather it out. And sort of, sort out exactly where that transition would happen. Just making sure there's no clear delineation between highlight and shadow. I don't want to look at it and say, oh yeah, there's that strong line right there. No, you want it to be much more subtle so that it's hard to see exactly where it sort of changes over, becomes a gentle transition from one to the other. See, and look at the difference there if I pop that off, how much harsher this is. And you don't want that harsh line, whereas when you put it back on, it's much more subtle. It sort of fades into shadow, and that's what you want. And if it's still too harsh, you just brighten it up at the source and then pull it further out. So we're giving yourself a nice, like, long runway. Can really help. Right, now we have it's nicely faded in, and we're going to do the same thing under here. Now some of it we had already kind of done a shadow on. Here. And we'll bring that down, considering his shape. But see, you can kind of still see a line here, so we don't want that. So I'll continue brightening that up until there's no clear line. Now the other thing we're going to do is give him a little burst of light under his eye. Just like on this side you have that coming out. It's coming out on this side, and with predators, their faces are forward facing, their eyes are forward facing. And so we're going to do just a little bit of a burst, and we'll fade that out too, but we'll fade it as it comes over, right? Because you probably are going to have a dip that would fade this out, but it's going to be coming up a little bit on that back side. And then we're going to fade this out. It's actually perfect because we do want to give a little burst to the fact that this cheek is a little higher than after the dip. Right, so we're going to give that just a little burst all the way over. Now before we're done, I am going to temper this a bit. To temper it, I'm just going to light pin pressure, but draw over top because I don't want this to be that extreme. Certainly want it to be there, but not that much. See, that does a lot to temper it. So it's there, but it's not quite as noticeable. And by tempering it, you make it not as deep of a rise or a valley, right? Like it tempers it just that little bit so that it looks a little bit more natural. So, same thing on the other side. But now I'd say they're both kind of even. I can clearly see both of them, which is good. And now we'll get to the white. So, we have the white up here, and the eyes. Underneath that little bit of shadowing even though I know there's black around the eye. Still gonna add that in, because the black in theory would be taking some of that shadow. And then full pin pressure. Same thing on this side. A little bit of shadowing. And the added effect of that, there's it transitions into shadow over here. So making sure this matches what we've already done before sliding that back into highlight. Now if we want to timber this out, you can extend that white up, right? So by pushing this into this brown, it fades out the line in between one color to another. So it's a little harder to see where a transition has happened. And then of course down in here, not a lot of room to work with under his mouth here. So I'm going to do all of this in shadow. So you're, the bottom edge obviously in shadow. And then as mouths sort of come over this way, typically there's a dip there. So there's often just a little bit of shadowing on that inside of the mouth. And then of course all edges are in shadow. And that includes up into here because we have that dip. And what's nice about it, right, like once you get the shadows in, you've done, especially on like the side that's that has highlights, you've done kind of a lot of what you need to do to sort of figure out everything else. So it becomes really easy to just add highlights, still putting some thought into the blending and stuff, but I don't have to worry about where my shadows are. I've already placed them, unless of course sometimes I'll change something on the fly. Mid drawing you'll realize something isn't working, and like always, I always pull back because that's going to give me the best view of what's happening, to make sure, for instance, does his does this look right, which in my opinion it does. Things like that, I'll have a better view of that when I back out. You also get the sense with that white added in, the narrow face, so that dip up here now seems to make more sense, although once again I'm going to taper this off just a little bit. Not much, just a little bit, to match better what we did above it. You still have that sense of that, narrow face happening, and you can still see kind of his mouth, his lip over here. So yeah. Just a matter of filling it in and making sure it's blended by the, oh, that's a little harsh, by the shadows. This side I'm going to do all in shadow and then sort out the highlights from there, because there will be some. Mostly over here, but we're going to do it all in shadow first. Okay, now I'm going to get his chin real fast, which is the same thing. It's going to have some highlight, but it's going to be easier, especially with so little space, to do it all in shadow first. But I always typically draw the chins in shadow because it gives me that control to be able to sort out the highlight. It's not big, luckily, so it's be nice and quick. Now, so the nose isn't really big enough to block a lot of the light, but you do have a twisting down that's happening here right underneath. So we're going to give a little bit of a burst over here towards the top, not the bottom. We're not working with a ton of space, not as much as we usually do. We're going to bring that all the way over though, and connect it back up. Into here. And just like up here, we're going to have this brighten up just a bit above that line. Not a lot. This would be in shadow. Brighten this up just a little bit. And brighten up this just a little bit. And then I'm going to give his chin a very, very small burst. So nothing big. Yeah, now I'm going to add in some white. There's some areas that have more white than others, including under the eyes. So we're going to add a little bit of white in, just as like what's kind of up in here. I have some of that white. I think oh yeah. Except I don't really delineate it, so don't know that that's actually helpful. Alright, and then we're going to do the same thing on this side. Give it a little burst under the eye, just like we did with the shadows and highlights for the brown. Alright. There's also still the white to do up in here, but we're going to add some white on top. It's always better to do a lighter color on top of a darker color when you're doing something like this, because that'll help blend it. Doesn't have to be anything big. Still putting one stroke in between the others, even though it's somewhat more sporadic. Same thing on the shadowed side, but lighter pen pressure. Same idea though. Mixing in that white. And now I'm just going to see about blending this in a little better so that the edges aren't quite so crisp, just like we did with the eyes. And now we have the white here, right up against the ear. And it comes all the way across. I am doing this in light pen pressure. Some of it's gonna gonna have a little bit of shadowing, but that's why I'm doing it on light pen pressure. is to let me add highlights without pushing it into the tips. I mean, if you have it, that's fine, especially because it is on the side of the light source, so inevitably one or two hairs are probably pushing up a bit. And then on this side, same thing, except for the most part it is going to stay in shadow. A little bit, once again, at the connection point, because I think there's still some highlighting in here. And then brightening that up and fading it in. And then fading it out after we hit that point. There you go, he's looking pretty good. Alright, so before we get to the ears, I'm gonna fix this right over here, right? Like we can see his mouth on this side, but not really on this side. So I'm just gonna go find that layer. And we're gonna do that by just brightening this up a little bit. Alright, so I want to make sure we can tell that's where his mouth is on this side. I don't want to do much because it's in that shadowed side, but I need it to pop enough. More visible than it was, but it's still a bit... I don't know how it looks if I take off the bottom. Because the other trick is I don't want it to be out of place in the context of the shadows and highlights around it. That's probably good enough. We can clearly see it now. Before you really had to look to see it. Now we can clearly see it's there, which is good. Now we're going to get into the ears. So, back side of the ear in shadow, right? Like all of this back side. This is in shadow. Ears also, just like the nose and the mouth. Ears tend to be some of the shortest hair on an animal. Sometimes it's less true, or I should say that it's happens more frequently that the nose and mouth have shorter hair, and sometimes ears have longer hair, but I've seen it enough. Alright, this whole back side, this is away from the light source, right? So sun coming in, or light source coming in from over here, this is rounding away. You're getting to that back side of that ear. In addition to all edges being in shadow, just that back side. And we don't have a lot of room to work on the ear, but in theory that back side would be in more shadow. With less room, it's not always as noticeable. But we're going to give the a little bit of highlighting. And then on the other ear, well, I'll talk about that when we get to it, but it almost will be the opposite because of the angle of the light source. Not exactly, but... So a lot of this will be, well, a lot of this, there's not a lot of space to work with, but some of what we're drawing in now will be in highlight. And he's got long, fluffy white hair. And his ear, not uncommon to see in animals. And we'll be doing that as soon as we get the brown in. Okay, so let me get the tip. I was going to add highlights, but I'll do the tip first. Okay. So we're going to have some highlighting, and I'm going to fade that off. Don't have a lot of room to work with. I'm going to have some highlighting on this side though. Notice I'm not going all the way to the tip, and I'm fading it off as I bring it around the ear. Not going all the way there. We want to give ourselves ample sort of runway room to taper off a highlight. And then all the way down into here as well. Just refining it a little bit. Okay. And then I'm going to taper off this transition. There's a line, right? Like we don't want that line to be there. Yeah, and you can kind of see, you know, the way that highlight and shadow kicks in. You can tell that this is going into shadow, and there's something happening where it's blocking over here. So that's good. Visually, that's what we want it to do. Now we're going to get, you know, the edge on the opposite side. And once again on this, you know, even though we have less space, there's still some highlighting here as well, just on that edge. Now over here, this is rounded down, so this would also still kind of be in a little bit of shadow on this side now, and this comes up, so this is where the highlight would be, is coming on that inner part of the ear. And then the other side, so I mentioned that would be a little different, right? Light source is hitting more on this back side of the ear. Now again, all edges are in shadow, so this whole back side is in shadow. However, because of the angle, it'll be more backwards on this. Whereas this inner edge will be going into shadow. Back edge more in highlight, the reverse of this one, in effect. Okay, so probably a smidge of shadow where the head is running just into the ear, and you're going to have some highlight. But that highlight, again, is closer to that back edge. And pulling all the way down into over here. This, you know, however much you pull this highlight down for the ear will depend on how far down it's going, right? How much his body or the body of the animal is blocking it. So on some animals, right, their ears come way down on the sides of their head. So you would see less, or I'm sorry, as it comes down, less of this would be in highlight as the ear, you know, is blocked by the body. There's nothing really blocking it here. It's not enough on the Jackal. So you can see now we're pulling that highlight up along that back side. Again, all edges in shadow, so not going all the way to the back. It would be rounding away. And then tapering it on the other side. And, you know, pulling the rest of this down too. There'll be less highlight, if any, down this side. Maybe a little bit, but I don't know. With the hair, the fluffy white hair, it's probably going to be all blocked. So this is likely all in shadow, with the exception of maybe a little bit right here. Yeah, there might be just that smidge, not a lot, just that smidge of highlight right there. Okay, now he's got a lot of white hair, so we have some white hair coming up in here. This is just some extra fluff, and then we have the real real big fluff. I'm just getting an idea of exactly how I intended it. It's relatively easy to do. Typically the hair, you know, the white fluff is pretty fluffy. Long. And it usually angles up. Usually angles up as you come up to the top of the ear. So we'll pull in the brown into the white after we kind of get the white in place. I'm going to do light pin pressure first. And then we'll sort out the highlights from there. Now, the hair on the ears typically is a little bit more messed up. It's kind of going in a lot of different ways, so it's not necessarily all just nice and straight. And coming off there, it's probably sort of looping and twisting and, you know, doing a whole bunch of things, going in a lot of different directions. It's a little harder than I meant to, but that's fine. It'll, that'll be in highlight anyway, but that was harder than I meant for it to go. And then I'm going to mess it up just a little bit down here so it doesn't look like that's one nice neat edge. Same thing on the other side, just a little bit. Do the same thing on this side, lightly fill it in, and then, you know, kind of go from there. Add the highlights on both of them after I get both of them in here. Alright. Now, to add a little bit of highlighting. Highlighting on this side is going to be closer to the tip. And if a few strands of hair do end up with highlight at the tip, it's fine, but, you know, all edges in shadow, but again, you know, individual strands may catch the light because of just the nature of the way hair works. And then it's going into the ear on that back side. So being gentle with it, partly because you don't want it to be overpowering. You don't want to make the ear too bright. Since it's white and it's a whole lot of space, it can overtake a composition. But I want it brighter than what it currently is. It's pretty faded still. Looks gray. Don't want it to look gray. But I also don't want it to, you know, take over. But it's just loose, light strokes, sort of building it up. Doesn't have to be anything too perfect. The ear hair is pretty easy in that way because, you know, it would have some changes in hair direction inevitably. And then making sure that it's not, making sure it doesn't look out of place as it goes back into the ear, so brightening up that line a little bit. But this would be in shadow. And then little tufts down here also. And then this guy as well. So that's one side, and now we'll do the other. Now this one, that midpoint is really what's going to be in the highlight. Tip and this side is going into the ear, so this would be in shadow, and the tip is turning away from us, so that would be in shadow. So it's the midpoint of the hair before it goes into the ear as it's sort of rounding up. And again, a few strands probably can catch some, or will likely be catching some highlight, and so they may go all the way to the tip because that depends on the angle of the hair. Most of it's rounding inside, but a few strands may be doing something different. Just like before, tempering off some of these edges. Alright, same thing on this little tuft. Both the little tufts, midpoint, having some highlight. Now I'm going to take the brown and taper it off inside the ear. It's not going to do a lot. I'm not going to fully connect it. Just going to give it a little bit of a hint that smaller hair continues in. But the bulk of what we see has already been done. Right, so it's not many strokes. It's I'm sort of spreading out how much I'm doing. And I'm lessening off my pin pressure. That can really darken something up. And letting that sort of taper. Gonna make it a little brighter where it's connected into the ear, more bright, and by that I mean adding more brush strokes, right? Not putting more pin pressure, but adding more brush strokes, which will inevitably brighten it up. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. This is more in shadow though, so we'll have less. Probably won't brighten any up. Lessen it out quicker. Now, we'll do the nose. I'm gonna not do the eyes. Oh, I just noticed something. I'm gonna fix real fast. I'm gonna not do the eyes, the black of the eyes. I'm gonna see how it looks without it. I think it should work because you have the eye that will kick in. But until then, we're gonna be doing gray for black. For the nose, and then yeah, just letting the eyes sort of stand out. Like letting black stand for its own, but sometimes there's just too much information we need that's in the black, and I do have to draw it in. Right, so on the nose, you know, stroke size doesn't matter. I am not putting a lot of pin pressure while I sort of sketch this in. Looping it on this side is, you know, when we get to the middle, we'll come straight down and then sort of angle it as we get to the side. And then down here, usually there's a bulge, right? So my stroke angle changes again and I start looping it a little bit more. And then, you know, almost straight back down as it comes out of that section. And then after we pass this midpoint, looping it the other way. And the same thing as before, right? As we come here, probably a bulge. So bulging that out. Now, black, it's a tricky thing to add highlights and shadows to. Because if I put full pin pressure, it will look gray. And if I'm trying to make black look black, I can't really do that, but I still want to add highlights and shadows. So the first thing I'm going to do is sort of lightly fill the whole thing in with very light pin pressure. And then we'll add a little bit of highlight on the side that needs it. All right, so holding that back. Being mindful of my strokes, how much pressure, and how many there are. That will all darken it up. Now some of what will make this look black, and I've mentioned this in other videos, is the colors it's surrounded by. So the brighter the other colors around it, And the darker this is, inevitably the darker it will appear. It's one of the ways that it helps push black to looking gray. So now, I'm going to gently not add more pin pressure, but I'm adding more lines. So I'm going to brighten this up. Right, not going down by the nostril because that's rounding underneath, so that would be in shadow. There would be some highlight here though, and underneath where the bottom side of the nostril is turned upward. See, I'm not doing much. Oh, that was a little heavy-handed, that's fine. Bring over, this is going to go into shadow on one side, that's why I left it blank, and then in highlight on the other to indicate the dip in his nose or the little I don't know, slit in his nose. Bringing this over just a bit, and then tapering that off. Right. Gonna fix this edge just a little bit. Make it look more like the other one. And pull the highlight down just a little bit. Not all the way down to the edge. It would be in shadow, but I definitely left it, I think, a little high. There we go. Now for his eyes. Alright, for eyes, first step is to sketch them in. So I'm going to start with the pupil. Draw a little circle. We'll be fixing the circle with the lasso tool, and then do the same thing on the other side. Make sure it looks like he's looking at us, which it does. Although I think this one is a smidge too high, so I'm just going to bring it down. All right. And then just sort of circle it now as I'm creating. So the top part will be in black. I usually do that. But we want to follow the angle of the eye because that's a shadow, right? So I want to bring this down as the eye comes down. Same is true on this side. Bring this over and then down as it comes to that back side. And then just fill it in. Not full pin pressure as I fill it in, because, you know, we'll be adding the highlights and shadows in just a moment. Right, there's the first eye. Now to get the second. Same thing. Right, follow that edge. As that edge of the eye comes down, we'll bring our line down. Because we're matching this line up here. We're matching this line with our line against the pupil. Right, same thing though. That same light pin pressure. Just loop them together. And you want these lines to be, I mean, there can be variations. I don't have the smoothest lines, as you can see, but you want them to kind of connect here, right? So these swoops would sort of swoop together. Okay, so before we do anything else, we're going to take the elliptical marquee tool and we're going to create a clean line for the pupil. And then do the same thing on this side. And I'm just going to make sure the edges are nice and straight. No, it's not straight. Okay. Now, I'm gonna fix this bottom connector point too. So, light source coming from above and to the right. So, the light source coming from over here. We are going to start by adding a burst of light on the pupil opposite of the light source, because our pupils are a recess into our eyes, and as the pupil comes back out, it would be catching the light. And then we are going to add, and this is full pin pressure, just like this was, we're going to add highlight on the side of the eye, on the side of the light source. But as we come to this edge, we're going to fade that out, and then there's going to be a little bit of shadowing on this side of the pupil, where the pupil is dipping into shadow as it dips into that recess. So tapering that off here, and then likewise, tapering it off on this back side here. But otherwise, you'd have highlight, and then obviously not going to the edge either, that'll be in shadow. Highlight coming all the way underneath into here. Bring that all the way over before it's going to kick into shadow on this back side, and it runs into that little highlight against the pupil, and then this edge once again back into shadow. Connecting into highlight. Before driving back into shadow on this side. A nice long runway and have a lot of room in order to taper off the highlight. So lightly filling that in, not full pin pressure. And then sort of fading that in, right? We have some room to work to make sure that it's a nice tapered descent into that shadow. And then fixing any gaps on this side. And then also at the top here, pulling this into just that little bit of shadow. So not full pin pressure at the top. On the side of the light source. Just very light. Okay. Alright, so that's one side. And then you can see from far back, sometimes there's little gaps in the way I've drawn it. it, so I'm just going to fill that in a little bit more. What's nice about this is this kind of mimics some of the muscles we have in our eyes, so it gives it that kind of look about it. All right, I'll do the same thing over here. Highlight against the pupil on the opposite side of the light source, going all the way under, and that's full pen pressure, that stripe, and then highlight on the iris. It's again on the side of the light source, goes into shadow as it hits this edge of the pupil. And then, you know, kicks back into highlight. And the edge in shadow. Before going right back into highlight. Right, and this highlight comes all the way underneath. Not to the other side, but all the way underneath the pupil. Before dropping back into shadow again. And then fade it, you know, in a lot of room to do that with. I guess at this point it's really more blending them together. Same with the bottom. Now we could leave it here. You know, this is certainly fine after we add the light flare. Let me also say the light flare is one of the most important things. But we can also do one other thing. And I think we're going to go ahead and do that. See how it looks. So if you want to add a little bit more effect, I would choose a different color to do this, and it needs to be a little lighter. So we're going to go lighter. And it's very pink. Maybe more yellow. Okay. So first things first, if we're going to do it, I'm going to give a little burst of it to the pupil. Doesn't need to be as much as the first one, right? That'll indicate that that light's really kicking in there. I'm going to do that on both sides. And then we are going to add squiggles. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to come up and back down and up, and we're going to do these really fast sort of squiggles aimed at the pupil all the way to the edge of the eye. So, oh, that was a little bright. So this one doesn't quite come out far enough, making sure this goes to the edge of the eye. If I need to, I can do very light lines instead of a full squiggle. As I come to the shadow, tapering that off, but pulling that all the way under, and then once again tapering it off. So I'm just doing single lines now. You can really kind of see what that does. If we need to add more, we certainly can. In fact, I think I'm going to bridge this gap, because there really shouldn't be one. And it's a quick way to give more detail to the eye, add a little bit more of that look of muscle in the eye. We're going to do the same thing over here. So all the way to the edge, these sort of quick, long strokes that taper off, but don't breach into the pupil. Not that long. And then really fading my pin pressure as I bring this over. Still needs to be there, or it being there can really help. Doesn't actually have to be there, but it can help with the effect. Now we brighten it up on the other side, so we're going to give it a little extra burst over here, and we're probably going to do just a little bit more once I'm certain we have it. Yeah, it's a little brighter on the other. Yeah, you get kind of that same burst. Now, if we wanted to, we could add a bit more into this. Really where that highlight's kicking in. Not going to really go into the shadowed section. We kind of already added those in. The question is that too much? I mean, I think we're going to leave it as is. But you can kind of see what it does. It adds this nice burst, which adds more detail for the eye. And then the last thing we're going to do is add the light flare. So the light flare is one of the most important things you can do for an eye. So I'm going to take the elliptical marquee tool again. Going to create a little bit of a circle, but we're going to do it in the highlighted section of the eye against the pupil, right? So I'm not going to have it like up in here where it's dark. I've already changed it to white, so I'm just going to edit. I think I'm actually going to make this smaller, just a little bit. Oops. Alright, edit and fill with the foreground color. And then drag it over and position it roughly the same place we did for the first one. Yeah, there we go. Some of what happens here, right, is because you want to line it up in the same position against the pupil, and this has more shadow. That's why I always start on the shadowed side. So then when you come to the side that has more room, I don't want to put it way up in here because that's not where it is over here. It will look wrong to us. So I need to make sure it's as far off the pupil, from the base of the pupil, as the other one is. I still don't think I quite have it. Decided to make that a little bigger. Yeah, that'll really give a good flare. I'm just gonna send it to the right just a bit. And there, you can really see how it kind of makes the eyes pop. It's having that light flare. Because our eyes are wet, so where that light source is hitting is really, you know, going to be illuminated in that spot. Alright, so that is how you draw a jackal. I hope that was helpful. In the floating nether next to me, I have other videos of art tutorials I have done, and I will see you all soon. Thank you so much. Take care.